Experimentation in entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial experimentation. Let me start with the story of a person that actually I share the same name with him, Ferran Adrià. He was known to be probably the best chef in the world. The restaurant that they had was called El Bulli. And what they would be doing is that they actually were developing dishes, new products, new concepts, new methods, and they were bringing them into this new experience that they were offering to the people that were going to this restaurant called El Bulli. What is interesting in the context of experimentation in entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial experimentation is that they were spending half of the year closed in a place near or inside actually in Barcelona, doing research, doing experiments, developing new tools, new techniques, and then they would be the other half of the year offering those as part of menus to the people that were joining the restaurant. Some of their products, you have images here, and you also see Ferran Adrià looking at one of the new probably textures that he was developing. And you also see examples of their dishes in those two pictures. So he was the first that was actually developing this foam as a new concept that food could be packed as foam with different flavors. And as you can see in the highlighted text, that maybe it was a cappuccino-like foam that would taste like a carrot or a popcorn. And this actually disrupted the new standards of the cuisine in high quality, the high cuisine in restaurants. This has been studied as an example of experimentation because the techniques, the approaches, the experiences, what they did was completely disruptive and radical in relation to what was the state of the art at that time. We will keep him as a background reference as we step into the concept of entrepreneurial experimentation or experimentation entrepreneurship. Let's get started. So, experimentation matters. There is evidence, and we have seen this, that not only in the scientific context, but also in the management context, that experimentation is interesting and it's useful. Here, quoting some of the famous work from Stephen Tomke, saying that experiments yield information through understanding what does and what does not work. This idea of the connection between experiments and learning and information is also something we will see during the whole time of this presentation. More closer to the context of entrepreneurship, the whole lean startup movement had experimentation as one of the new concepts that they were trying to put in. They were mentioning that what entrepreneurs should be doing in order to be successful was to build, measure, learn as a feedback loop, as you would be able to scale up and grow your business. And a lot of the work from Eric Rice comes from software-based startups. He actually was an entrepreneur that learned a lot through failures and things that didn't work. And then he tried to say, hey, maybe you should consider doing things this way in order to fail faster, fail quicker, and then be able to find maybe a potential fit with the market and your solution. Moving a few years forward, then we see some very nice evidence on what was happening when some startups were using A/B testing, when they were developing their website to improve the website. That was with a company called Optimizely that was at that time pioneering this idea of A/B testing, basically randomly showing to your potential customers two different layouts, two different structures. And this way you will learn also their preferences and you will be able to adjust, tune, and fit. And then you basically were able to achieve in some of the data that Rem and colleagues, they collected, that actually in 1 year, in some of the cases, more or less on average, there was 128% improvement on visits. So this was a very strong predictor of potential success in one of the key metrics in this case, not talking about performance in sales, but performance in actually making the website work for its purpose. So with this idea that there is an overall understanding that experimentation is a good and valid approach to learn and gather information, we then take a step forward. So what we do, or what I do in the next minutes, is to actually cover 3 different blocks. First, I would like to explain and share how experimentation has been observed, captured, described as a behavior through the perspective of entrepreneurship research as its own field of research. Then I will introduce a different approach to even, I would say, entrepreneurship, but that actually reshapes the role of experimentation in this process. That is what we are recently calling the theory-based view or the scientific entrepreneurship perspective. I will explain that this perspective doesn't come from purely the observation of those that have been successful or failed entrepreneurs. It actually comes from strategy. It comes from the idea of how should be the optimal way to do entrepreneurship. We will discuss and see more details about why this is important. And finally, taking into account that we are in a context where AI has become now the technology that everyone is considering or concerned in some moments about, I'll bring AI as also what does it mean for experimentation in entrepreneurship, and what are maybe some of the recent evidence and also some of the research opportunities that are coming up with this. With that being said, we move on. So first, those two contrasting perspectives of what is experimentation in entrepreneurship and how we can understand what does it mean in this context. First of all, I would like to set a quick agreement on the concept of entrepreneurship. So in entrepreneurship research, there is a strong view that what makes the field unique in relation to other management, marketing, finance, accounting, supply chain, other fields, is that the focus of entrepreneurship is to explain a phenomenon that is the new venture creation process. This new venture creation process can happen as a new organization, sometimes happens inside existing organizations, and sometimes happens in between. Two different organizations get together to create or support a new venture or a new type of initiative. What is also important is that there has been a strong tradition on also explaining like that entrepreneurship explains entrepreneurship research particularly focuses on action that is done by individuals or teams under conditions of what they call Knightian or what we call Knightian uncertainty. This means that is a perception of uncertainty that is actually not measurable, is not risk, it's not something you can reduce with information, therefore is even uninsurable. The idea of Knightian certainty is similar to that concept of unknown unknowns. So what do entrepreneurs do in this context where information cannot be mitigated, where there are missing pieces? They make decisions, they develop ideas, organize resources, generate outputs, create products, bring them to market in a context where there is something that we would like to describe as unknowable futures. This is important because that also explains why entrepreneurs might be carrying out this type of actions and not other actors in the economy. It could be an established company or other people. So that creates this space of where entrepreneurs have an advantage, or where we actually can very well limit the concept of entrepreneurship in comparison to other ideas like maybe innovation or launching a new product. No? This is the new venture creation process, and mostly in a context of where there is a strong perception of unknown unknowns by those individuals. These are unknowable features. In a more trying to bring also more structured approach and also related to decision making, we can imagine then that we have a situation where there is the entrepreneur tries to do some experiments to learn about an environment with the idea in the future to activate or to produce some types of outputs that ideally will generate outcomes that would be positive for that entrepreneur, would create value. What is also interesting and relevant is that there is, in decision making in this context, there is always multiple pieces that are playing in parallel. So one possibility as an entrepreneur decides to experiment, to learn about the environment, is that it has multiple choices, multiple options, multiple possible paths. If you want to think like this, it has multiple inputs, multiple possibilities. But it also has multiple possible goals. So what do you want to achieve? What do you expect to be the result of that experiment? What will you generate? So basically, those two elements make it very complex or very broad, the possibilities to what should I do, what come next. So it's all about, in these cases, to start closing the sets of potential, desirable outcomes that would be acceptable, or closing the sets of potential options or elements or inputs that I will use. I will not go into this direction, but this relates very much to the work of this effectuation versus causation, where the anchoring point of the entrepreneur as it tries to act is fixed either on what they have available on their hands or the type of effects or the type of outcomes that they want to achieve. So I want to create a startup that I can sell for 20 million. Then this will create a causal path that is very different from saying, I want to create a startup in my home with what I have available. I want to get started doing some bricolage. Then this is a completely different way of approaching and making decisions. This is important for us because the next steps that we are doing is looking at how those experiments happen in those contexts. So, the entrepreneurship research perspective, how has it evolved, where it comes from, and how it works. So with this idea of the new venture creation process, the experiments are those elements that we could define as control variations of interactions to retrieve knowledge, to learn about something. And actually, again, they connect, those experiments connect inputs or options as we were using before, and possible outcomes. So very similar to the concept that we would have as an experiment in the lab. We would combine A and B, expecting to see D under those circumstances or under that context, always controllable context in a lab, very different from sometimes the reality that entrepreneurs have. The way that entrepreneurship research has evolved has been by studying those entrepreneurs that were out there, looking at their trades, how their companies evolved, what was going on, how they were growing. So in entrepreneurship research, we usually describe experimentation as all these sometimes hustling behavior on the trial and error, trying to test things, fail, and then try again. And meanwhile, they would keep learning. They would keep accumulating knowledge about preferences in the market, options on doing better things, different types of products that they could think about. And then maybe eventually the profiles of personas or targets, and then eventually they would decide whether to go ahead or not, and maybe customize that product to the right audience. What is important to remember is that when we think about entrepreneurship research, developing and coming out through this observation of those entrepreneurs in society, what we end up capturing is also a lot of those individuals that have a proclivity towards action. So those are people that instead of reflection or thinking and waiting and analyzing, they decide to move ahead, regardless of the uncertainty, regardless of the idea that it's unknown or that it's unclear. They also have these classical elements are salient, like this overconfidence in themselves, in the future, in their possibilities. And we could call it this whole over-optimism, that they see that, yeah, maybe it will not work, but maybe it works, no? And to believe in the odds, even if the odds are against you, no? Very much against you. One of the experiments, the elements that are very well captured with this perspective is that the whole lean startup works as an experimentation promotion tool. The whole book that has become very popular in the entrepreneurial community, very prescribed. And basically one of the core ideas also from Steve Blank is this concept of get out of the building, test your ideas, don't stay in the classroom or in your house, experiment and learn. No? And this will be a good trait and a good indicator of your future success. So the whole area of experimentation in the entrepreneurship research has developed by itself. And there is work that, for example, studies the antecedents. So what influences entrepreneurs to experiment, whether it's the prior experience, the industry knowledge that they have, that the fact that they don't have many resources, this would connect even to elements like frugality or other elements. They have to experiment, they want to reduce a bit their risk of losing the resources that they have, or the whole uncertainty perception that they might feel. Another area that of research has been the work on objects and artifacts that they use to experiment. For instance, what is the function of prototypes? So that when you don't have yet a product, but you craft an element that looks like your potential product, and then you use it to pitch your idea to try to convince a customer. You can also think about in those experiments to test ideas, how they use landing pages. We talked before about the case of this A/B testing. So landing page, a representation of the products you want to offer, the look and feel of what things might be, or for example, a pitch deck. So how you design a pitch deck, how you work with it, even how you pitch your idea, how you present your idea, or all the way to the concept of crowdfunding campaigns, the presentation, again, using videos or other tools. Also, as part of the elements to experiment is, do I have a viable idea? Is my product interesting for my potential audience? So, similarly, there has been also ongoing entrepreneurship research in the whole area of consequences. So what happens when people experiment? If they experiment well, if they structure those, what Chen et al., for example, talk about programs of experimentation that allows them to do pivots when they should be doing a pivot. Once an idea is not working, maybe they should shift, or maybe they have a better opportunity, or there is an option to accelerate growth and to scale up. So the whole idea that experimentation as a tool to grow and develop your business, and good experimenters, let's say companies that are good at organizing systematically experimentation, seem to be more also successful. This is again the case that companies like Optimizely have been very interested in showcasing. However, this would then give us a picture where we would say, okay, is this the end of the story? So do we have entrepreneurship research in the last 30, 40 years has maybe first captured experimentation as mostly this trial and error, in looking for this market fit, then in a more structured or through these feedback loops that the lean startup projects and suggests, that the whole idea of experimentation is part of an internal process that allows new ventures to grow and develop. This would be one of the sides of the story, and this would give us this picture again that I was mentioning, this idea of get out of the building, test your ideas, experiment and learn. And the underlying element that is here is that there is an assumption that there is an information asymmetry between the entrepreneur and the market. And so that those customer preferences, those needs of the market that are out there, but maybe the entrepreneur doesn't fully know. Through experimentation, this information asymmetry is mitigated, and you learn, they get disclosed, those customer preferences, those interests, and then you're able to actually do those things that the market was demanding. There is here, as you can already perceive, a very strong assumption that, let's say, preferences, needs are out there, and it's all about the efforts of the entrepreneur to actually discover and clarify those needs. And it's let's say in some way that it's all about the entrepreneur getting closer to that customer. And then that was there, but it was an effort to try to find it. This approach received or has been criticized in some way, more than I would say even criticized. It's like that it also shows that there are some limitations. If we were prescribing, or if we ended up only talking, or only thinking that this is the only way to do entrepreneurship, like by observing those entrepreneurs that rely heavily on experimentation, we might be actually ending up with some problems. Feline et al., among other people, have been kind of expressing those concerns in several ways. One of the main aspects that is concerning, or that is interesting, is also that at some point we forget that we are building a lot of the knowledge about what does it mean to do experimentation, why experimentation might be conducive to good learning, by observing a sample of entrepreneurs that it's actually not very well balanced. We are looking at a lot of the entrepreneurs that actually have been successful, serial entrepreneurs that have tried several times, and they have maybe other traits, other capabilities that are behind their success besides the idea that they've been experimenting. The usual question is, okay, how much can we be convinced that other entrepreneurs that were also experimenting have actually not ended up with a different type of outcome, that fail maybe. Additionally, and that comes more from that's where the strategy element or the strategic management perspectives start to appear. There is an ongoing question whether, okay, this captures reality or describes what we observe. Is it, however, the optimal behavior of entrepreneurs in the context of society, in an economic system? Is this, so we're not anymore aiming to describe, but also aiming to question whether is this the most adequate allocation of resources, these people that experiment until they basically learn or fail, and that the whole picture is not very clear. More concerning is the whole idea that this is promoting experimentation without a direction. What does this mean? Is the idea that when we interpret or when we read or we extract the comments of the Lean Startup and other approaches that promote this idea of getting out, talk to people, get feedback, we are starting to miss, okay, what about interpreting that feedback? What about will I just basically then be exposed to my own cognitive biases of neglecting the feedback that challenges my idea, and I will just keep developing it, but learning only on the things that I actually am interested in, because I will, at some point, I will be so much oriented towards trying to also fit what I'm doing with my market that I will actually stop analyzing or considering or reflecting what am I doing in relation to what I was intending to do, this type of elements. And the whole also concept that maybe there is we are promoting somewhat randomness. No? What happens when the first people that an entrepreneur experiments with are the first that are available, and they are not carefully selected as the people that actually will give him the better information or will help him to assess better if their idea is good or not. So the final critique that is also very relevant is that if we were promoting all startups to be optimizing those choices and to be basically adjusting to the market demands, a lot of those startups or new companies would end up generating what we sometimes say, no, this new app that does an additional function, this incremental improvement, but not actually those radical breakthrough, complicated ideas that maybe have more impact also in society. And that's one of the again, concerns or complaints that are underlying with the excessive promotion of this perspective. So now we kind of departure, and we coming a bit out of nowhere in some way, out of nowhere, not because the authors and the team behind, they come out of nowhere, but it was starting to come somewhat as a surprise for entrepreneurship researchers. And this was dealing with entrepreneurs as the unit of analysis or the subject of analysis. Is what starts to appear, we could say it's the paper in 2020 that in management science, that basically through a randomized control trial where they were training entrepreneurs, in this case was in Italy, with different approaches to do entrepreneurship. So some of them were receiving the classic training about the Lean Startup tools, doing business model canvas, doing some experiments, some tests, and other groups were actually getting the same training, but they were having, at the earlier stage, they were having very specific and clear inputs on the importance of developing a theory. A theory as an understanding of how things work out there. So how their actions, their products would be connected to outcomes, and they would develop a theory on how the world could work for them. In this starts to become like this concept that there might be an optimal form of entrepreneurship where entrepreneurs identify a problem, develop a theory, test predictions that they might be developing based on this theory through experiments, and then they adjust accordingly. What they observe, and that's the diagram that I was showing before, so the theory appears before you get out there and start to experiment and try to do things. You try to develop a very clear understanding of what is your what they call also theory of value. So how do you think this will be a successful business? What will be the key elements that will make it work? What are the sub-elements, sometimes even, or the sub-problems that you have to solve in order to make this work? What they observe, and that's where I would say that most of us were getting excited, or we find is very interesting, is that they saw significant effects. And they saw that across time, those that were in the treatment group were reporting higher revenues. And this was not happening just a moment, and actually this was happening as for the following weeks, even after a year, they would still be able to see the effect. This starts in this small test, if you want to say a small test, in 2020. Then in 2024, very recently, they have been able to publish all the replications they've done of this test. And the main story remains and stays there. So there is a substantial positive effect on performance as revenues, even the most kind of desired ever kind of, I would say, performance measure of having this conscious work early on developing a theory, that the entrepreneur crafts a theory of how their business should work or would work and create value. Something interesting to add to this is that one of the very strong drivers of why those effects are so strong is that something that they see is that those entrepreneurs that have a theory are able actually to kill projects faster. So when they start doing something or some experiments and they don't get the results, they know that part of the theory, that sub-problem they thought it was important, they need to drop it. And they can focus their resources, their time, what they have left, into those other experiments or other elements of the theory that they want to still keep sharpening and validating. So using those theories as an anchor point, they are able to make what we would like to call, or we can call, better decisions. So they kill earlier projects that would fail. And this doesn't happen with the other startups, and that way we also see this average effect that is lower. So they carry on, they keep investing in projects or in ideas that actually will not perform. And there is also interesting add-ons on what type of pivots they do, whether they are more radical, more. This is still an area that probably will get a further attention also in coming months. These findings in 2020 actually are a result of an ongoing whole bunch of research projects happening in Italy, the UK, then all across Europe. They've been running replications of this study. This is in part also supported and financed with the ERC that Alfonso Gambardella received from the EU. And then they basically, now all those experiments, all those studies, those cases, they are field experiments, RCTs, are coming out and being published almost at the same time. So the end of last year has seen a lot of those studies actually coming out at the same time. This creates empirical evidence that supports what had already also started to be developed on the theory-based view, mostly in strategic management, so SMJ journal, with a different type of, so it was mostly with also with Zenger and other colleagues that have been developing those ideas. And so the coexistence of those two elements starts to question even like, okay, maybe we need to start promoting a different way of doing entrepreneurship. Maybe we should talk about this scientific entrepreneurship, where entrepreneurs should behave as scientists. I think something that we can imagine is that then this appears as not that much based in observation, but so if the experiments started to happen in 2018 or 2017, and the results started to come out in 2020, there is now a whole movement of this concept of experimentation as one of the scientific methods of entrepreneurship, because actually this is the right way, the optimal way of doing entrepreneurship. I'll just to synthesize also in some of the key elements of this work. So what does this change versus what I have been explaining in the first part? So what it changes is that Now there is what we could call an anchoring point or a reference point for the entrepreneur as it experiments, as it does things, to actually go back and check what does it mean for what I was doing. However, this is not only that it has an anchoring point. It actually, what happens is that the theory works as a lens, as a way of helping the entrepreneur, guides the entrepreneur on what to look for and observe specific things. So it gives them a focus on, hey, if this and this and this and this should be working, or those are the problems you should solve. If you solve those problems, you will be able to then create this unexpected element. As I have the image here of the Wright brothers' first plane that also Feline uses as an example in the papers, but also in some presentations that he's been doing. So what happens is that this approach helps us to understand how entrepreneurs actually can engage in alternative, what they like to call even contrarian beliefs. So high novelty projects through having this structured search. This structured search goes against what we have seen in most cases on search that is somewhat random. So that the important thing is that you go out, you look for things, but and you will learn them, you will process. So what is interesting is that in this context, it gives a direction to the entrepreneur on what to search, on what to look for. So having this theory challenges the concept of randomness in search and actually makes it non-random search, also potentially connected to ideas of search theories, organizational search theories with Posen et al. So what we end up having then, it's potentially disruptive way of thinking about how experimentation can have and add value to entrepreneurs and what is the function of experimentation. Now it's not anymore that experimentation is the crystallization of activity of the entrepreneur that is excited to go out in the market. Actually, now experimentation has a very clear function that is to help to validate, elucidate, contrast, falsify the theory that they have on the where is value, or how value will be created in that business idea. The unavoidable then question is this view. Would it explain better? So would this be a disruptive change of path in entrepreneurial action explanations? So will it change the way we understand how entrepreneurs operate out there? Well, the story is that not necessarily. So, and I would say that this is one of the points that now it's still open for debate. Basically, the argumentation, and this comes from Rick Hunt and colleagues, is that this approach of thinking of experimentation linked to a theory that could be disruptive might be ineffective in situations where entrepreneurs are actually not facing a pure uncertainty, a pure unknown situation. And that's where things get, I would say, interesting, because then the reflection is that, okay, do all the actions that entrepreneurs do, all the experimentation that they engage in, is it always in known unknowns, in these very complicated situations where there is no information, and the only way to gather information is through action and through disrupting or moving ahead? And then it becomes a more nuanced discussion. The whole introduction of the concept of, okay, behind this idea of perceived uncertainty, maybe there are elements that are completely unknowable, so really pure uncertainty. Maybe there are elements that actually are perceived as uncertainty, but behind what it's a different type of knowledge problem. It's not pure uncertainty, impossible to learn anything about a situation. This is something that requires more attention and potentially helps us to advance on the connection between experimentation and uncertainty in those contexts. That's why before we jump into the whole idea of how AI helps or how AI can contribute, it's good to take a step back and look at what does knowledge problems mean in this context and how can it help. So again, going back to the initial model, so what we have is this entrepreneur that wants to experiment, to learn about the environment, to maybe be able to craft or adjust the potential outputs actions that it does and what it comes back to them. What is relevant is that every element in the picture is open to be a source of uncertainty. So the experiment, which options do I have to experiment? With whom? With what effects should I pay attention to and which ones I should not pay attention to? The environment where I'm operating. First, an element that is present in the whole process is time. So when I check things in moment 0, they might not hold in moment 1 or moment 2, when then I can actually launch the venture or take more action. And similarly, I also might have complete missing information about what are the types of outputs that I will be able to create. Again, using AI as an example, when some of those entrepreneurs developing AI tools, they sometimes might not have been fully clear of what type of problems they will be solving. We think about our people working with quantum and said, okay, what will be the application? What will be the critical value that I will be able to do? So I have to do experiments about the potential functions and features of the technology without maybe fully understanding the output or outcome. So all those are sources of uncertainty that they also shape the entrepreneur, the identity, the beliefs of the entrepreneur, and their objectives and what do they want to achieve. So where do knowledge problems then potentially connect with the whole boom that we have on the AI as a technology that should change everything? Definitions of, or very brief definitions, just that we also have a common anchoring point on knowledge problems, and then maybe the element that it's still very exploratory on how AI, this AI-enabled experimentation could be working. So uncertainty, we would then keep uncertainty as this, with these knowledge problems views, would be the pure uncertainty. So future conditions are completely unknowable. They cannot be resolved with more data. So it's a situation where it's even AI-enabled experimentation is somewhat unclear a priori. Ambiguity is where, borrowing from Carl Weick, is where sense-making collapses. We don't have, among different people, it's not clear what leads to what. We need to have this inter-subject agreement. So unless, it's difficult to interpret what does it mean, what does this actually translate into. Complexity, it's those situations where we have many interactions with multiple variables, multiple moving elements. They are complex, complexity as complex systems, and this makes the resolution of the whole system of interacted and interconnected elements very challenging. Here, together with ambiguity, are elements where a priori we also can maybe think that AI seem to be LLMs. Seem to have some potential here to help us. Equivocality, those knowledge problems where actually we have multiple conflicting interpretations that can stay in this contradictory status for long, and they might be mutually exclusive, and they might be withheld by different types of actors or by different elements, and at the same time, it's very difficult to put them together. This is sometimes also can be explained with this idea that we don't have a common formula. We don't have an equation that links A to B and C. Actually, some people represent the equation or the function in one way, others in another way, and both seem to work and hold true for themselves, but they are contradictory. Here's another situation where the whole idea of using AI to experiment is a priori a bit unclear how this can help us. Before we step into the elements into the AI and experimentation, I would like to add a couple of caution or elements or to be careful about. So this is a very fast moving area. Technology is changing fast. A lot of incredible, nice research is going on. I'm just putting one example also on the left side, recently published at the Strategy Science, the work from Felipe Casar and other colleagues, looking at, for example, how AI was able to improve business plans of entrepreneurs, and actually it helped and even was better at convincing some investors that their startup idea was worthwhile to invest. So we actually refined the business idea of the entrepreneur, those similar ideas that they developed. It improved them much better than the humans could improve. On the other hand, I brought back, this is an old, I would say old, or at least like 24 years old article where microportal, when internet was in the still boom moment, came out in the year 2001, there was this more or less shared idea that the internet was making a strategy irrelevant. And then he wrote an interesting piece where he was claiming that, hey, wait, still strategy matters and it's important. And those elements, the internet will change many things, and actually it will change things maybe that will make a strategy even more important. I would like to keep this as an element present in the discussion or in the next steps, because you will see that there are some similar effects happening with AI. The idea that it might increase actually competition instead of reducing it. This is something that we still have to see how it unfolds. Last and the more technological aspect, when discussing about AI and LLMs, everything seems to be becoming obsolete very fast. We have seen in the last 4 or 5 years a rapid evolution of AI as a technology. So from the idea of AI mostly as built on probabilistic models and basically being a machine learning, the whole disruption with the generative AI, ChatGPT, here I'm talking of different versions like the last, talking about the 4.0. But then also there are some potential new approaches to AI as a technology. This idea of more causal AIs, that is sometimes a combination of machine learning, generative AI, and to do even inference elements, that seems to also be maybe happening, or generative AI might keep evolving in ways that we now don't fully imagine or cannot fully understand. So when discussing about AI impact, the AI effects, we will have always to be very specific about the present with the current tools, and maybe also consider the future development scenarios. With that in mind, let's go. So we have now evidence. There is an increasingly visible impact that generative AI, LLMs, might be becoming better tasks that were previously thought to be only exclusively done by humans. Just a few examples: prediction activities, creative writing, business advice, problem solving, and most, I would say, information-related tasks. It's interesting, the business advice case. I will make a reference again later, the work from Otis et al., for example, facilitating business advice and mentoring to those that might not have resources to have a human mentor, but actually they can rely on AI support that has been properly prompted and properly developed to help them to get some clarity and questions that they might have. So there are many interesting aspects where the AI might have, or the LLM might have advantages even in comparison to the humans performing those tasks. In general, and also related to our experimentation context, what is, I would say, fascinates most of us is the potential that it has to recombine existing information that has been used as data to train the LLM to generate and evaluate ideas, concepts, pitches, sketches, anything that we are working on. So we are having also increasing evidence that actually it's able to solve problems faster, and it does it with a good fitness, good quality. And increasingly, we are able to also start to gain this explainability element, that it has more reasoning capabilities, still depending on the training data, but it's actually even gaining on the possibility of understanding the process on how A leads to B, or the steps in between. So this would be moving ahead from the machine learning aspect, where sometimes we were not able to. It was really working as a black box. On top of that, in our context of experimentation, this opens a whole new frontier when we think about the possibilities that nerds or other actors can run experiments in silico. They can run experiments, simulated persons that don't exist in reality, but are just combining elements that have existed in the past, profiles that have been there, and data that can be used to create personas. Like this idea that there are also other research papers coming out on the whole concept of leveraging the wisdom of the crowd, but actually it's a virtual crowd. It's not, you don't have to talk to 1,000 people. You're able to generate 1,000 profiles, 1,000 personas, and then use those to activate ideas or to validate concepts. Now we try to connect, we look at the possibility of interrelating now those different knowledge problems with what is maybe the status right now of AI as a tool and the possibilities it offers. Now, if we look at or we think about the whole uncertainty that I was mentioning that is a bit unclear. However, if the causal AI develops further, it gains capabilities such as imagination. Like this is important to differentiate from the hallucination, the fabrication of things that when an expert looks at them, it makes no sense. So if the ability to imagine or to create things that actually surprise even those experts is maybe something that might be happening and might change the game. Similarly, again, in this future scenario, if those AI systems or AI solutions, they gain agency, then it's difficult to also predict how this would go. No? They would gain autonomously, could gain, be able to influence even the environment where they operate, and then could generate and manipulate outcomes. So it would change situations that now are completely unknown. Those possibilities of disruptive possibilities of AI systems could change this, especially when the system would take over and create their own futures. Ambiguity is maybe one of those that it's somewhat more clear. The possibilities when you think about generative AI that leverages past data, could identify those dissonant points, could revise current interpretations, and would be maybe able to reduce this disagreement distance. This would make, for many of those situations where the entrepreneur is facing ambiguous doubts that actually are perceived sometimes as uncertainty, it would actually help to mitigate or reduce that uncertainty through experimentation with maybe AI. Similarly with complexity. So complexity is maybe one of those that is more clear in some of the research that has been done when they try to push a bit further what is actually this perceived uncertainty, these doubts, those elements that appear, and actually what when decoded most of the times are related to situations that we would describe as complex. So many possible options, many possible what we were seeing at the beginning, a very open set of possible inputs, many possible outcomes, and then it's difficult to know which combination is the one you should explore first and prioritize and organize your work. When you think that generative AI can create scenarios, personas, simulate plausible realities, those multiple options maybe can be run in parallel or tested, and then we could improve decision making and mitigating that complexity and maybe favoring people that then they would be acting. They would not wait because delay more the action. No? And it would be a better informed decision than just randomly picking one of the combinations. More difficult, the aspects of equivocality. Here's where those situations where different views are held in parallel, so different functions to explain how things happen. Maybe both can be true, but they are contradictory. Those situations are a bit difficult, but if we think about the possibilities that when we believe that generative AI is actually even able to start, or it has started to happen, to start producing data that becomes part of the reality that where we coexist, that actually could bring us to situations where we have this AI plus the concept maybe of these digital twins, where we can have alternative scenarios that have never existed or that would never exist otherwise. But now the AI becomes also a participatory agent of reality. So they are creating part of reality. If we think about all the data and experiments that people have been generating or engaging with LLMs, it starts to become, they are part of the reality, and they would have maybe, they will introduce alternative explanations in these equivocal situations. Maybe their explanation will become dominant, or their view will become dominant. So then this might be changing. So that's I think that's one of the complicated aspects that are still out there. So what is trying to grasp or to put a bit of more order in this concept? What are the current states and capabilities? So we mostly would agree that generative AI has become a very powerful recombination tool. And this results in the perception that actually the minimum threshold is now much higher and it keeps going up. And it means a minimum threshold in novelty. So what is considered novel now? There are other ways to validate whether this already existed before, didn't exist before. And the same way on the level of elaboration of the ideas, how precise, how specific they are. Well, when you can get additional help to already describe 3, 4, 5 possible different versions of that idea, it's increasing the minimum threshold that everyone needs to achieve. The bar has gone up, not gone down. At the same time, there is also an expected low experimentation cost. That is also still to be seen, no? With the models and how much people have to pay to use those models. But it seems like the possibility of tapping on these virtual crowds and the speed in feedback should reduce experimentation costs. So what does it mean? That people need to allocate less to experimentation, or that they can experiment more? That's one of the elements that it's still moving out there. Also, so far what we have seen is that when in some way we have given some agentic capabilities to the AI systems, the very first tendency that starts to appear is that the AI system tries to manipulate the environment in order to be able to make sure that their outcomes are better for the AI agent. So this already, there was an example recently on stock trading or other elements where multiple agents were operating together, and they already started to agree on prices or set up things that would benefit the optimization problem that they were being put in, or the challenge that they had. As the perception here is that this might not be the ideal scenario. This might not be the best situation. Similarly, we still have this whole very open area on the future stage of AI capabilities that are coming out. If you look 4 years ago or 3 years ago, we see what has happened, what will happen the next 3-4 years. It looks like, okay, there might be a lot coming in. Also, last week has also been interesting in this sense. So what is interesting is that the adoption and the development of those tools increases. Competition might also be increasing, also among entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs were mostly, would say, competing for attention in many situations, but now they might have to, the bar might have to be even higher. And so interesting findings from the work from Otis et al. Is that when they give this WhatsApp ChatGPT combination to entrepreneurs, actually they don't see a clear effect on those that actually benefit from having the AI support versus those that don't have it. Actually, it might be that in some situations where information starts to become, because maybe they are using other tools or other supports, starts to become that much redundant, that it's actually everyone has to compete more, or it's harder, but we don't see a clear benefit for those that are using the latest version. No? So everyone has to push a bit harder. Maybe this connects to the idea of the work from portal and the strategy and the internet, that as the technology becomes widespread and adopted, everyone has to do better to just stay in the market, to stay out there. Finally, also reflecting or mentioning again the previous concerns on the role of these generative, let's say, AI agents, no? That the actors that will start to be participating in the economy or in society. If the way that they are coded, the way that they are developed is to mostly capture rents, then this generates scenarios where we might have these human AI-enabled humans and AI pure actors competing for the same rents on a limited number of rents. So this is not this Schumpeterian situation where we all benefit from innovation that improves society, but actually what we see is a fight to capture the available profits of the rents that are out there. So this is also scenarios that seem more point to more competition, not less competition. So final remarks on the whole experimentation, entrepreneurship, with this considering AI as an element that is very present. So trying to look a bit beyond the research discussion and also including some societal implications here. No? There are several questions open. So what entrepreneurs will benefit from this AI-enabled experimentation, these new possibilities, new tools? What are the barriers? How do we secure access for a wide representation of those entrepreneurs? Are we actually creating what is meant to be an inclusive tool? Maybe we'll be excluding some other people. How does this interaction with the LLM actually exclude some type of ideas or include some ideas that maybe would not be included otherwise, or some types of actions? As this creates a lot of ethical considerations and how much we leave responsibility in those developing the LLM, those individuals using it, or the whole society that tries to regulate what is going on. Another very relevant point is like how will this change entrepreneurial activity? Will it create new dependencies that the entrepreneurs need to rely now on this assisted support from the LLMs that will help? Very relevant point for entrepreneurship, and especially entrepreneurial ecosystems. No, like how will learning be shared? Now we have all these aspects that people share learning or give back, and the support elements in entrepreneurship. Now, okay, how will this work now when we rely on the LLM as a support tool and also as an experimentation tool? So the experimentation that happens in that context, how is then that learning shared or transferred, or whether it's visible to others or not? So like a second level effects, like you might also think about what does this also mean for the different steps in the life cycle of entrepreneurship. How does this increase? Does it increase mostly the competition in ideation, like in this idea pitch to get attention from people? Does it have an impact on the different types of entrepreneurship that we can see? So digital entrepreneurship or solutions become AI enabled by default versus those working in a quantum machine. They don't need that much, or how does this affect? Also, what we were mentioning before, no? This whole concept of if it becomes prevalent to use the AI and the current state of AIs to think and ideate, does this make people less willing or less interested in novel, contradictory ideas? Do they have worse theories than, let's say, worse quality theories, less bold, less novel? Do we increase or reduce human agency? We have a lot of research on there's been a lot of research in decision support systems on how much people, when they were getting input or support sometimes from the information system to support the decision, they were sometimes a bit reluctant to actually follow the guidance. No? This is maybe something that now has changed, or it comes across in a different way. But yeah, the question is like, will this increase or decrease the human agency in processes like entrepreneurship, where it's a lot about beliefs and ownership? And I would say even more important, like what social problems then will be prioritized. So we've seen, there is a clear in the last years, especially when we think even about Silicon Valley or other contexts, where there has been a lot of attention given to those problems that could be easily monetized, or that were somewhat easier to monetize. And this left many other social problems that we have that are very important, unattended. Does this then mean that some public actors could leverage those tools to actually pursue those type of problems, what we could call these poorly catered opportunities and relevant social needs? Does this then allow those public actors that have limited capacity to do those things, but actually they can leverage this type of technology or tools to have those agents helping them? No? So maybe there is also a positive side. I don't want to sound too negative. In general, the whole element is that there might be more questions than answers, and this is a quickly evolving complex system where there are interactions between individuals, technology, and society that also has evolving challenges and needs, especially depending on in which context you are right now in the world. So I don't want to finish without doing a final reflection. No? So if we go back to the case that I was using at the beginning of this cook that actually created a new way of thinking about cuisine with their innovations there, and they had a very strong culture of experimentation, to try new things. So as a thought exercise, no, it's like, would this concept, if it had been pitched to an LLM at that time, not now, because maybe now the LLM knows about this concept and probably would say that they were somewhat successful, but would it have been positively evaluated to create a small restaurant in the middle of nowhere, operating only 6 months a year with a limited number of tables? Would that have been evaluated as a positive idea? So would they have been received an okay if it was in a pitch, in an AI, let's say, enabled pitch competition assessment? The other question, would they have been able to generate the novel products and cooking methods if they had just basically relied on AI and experimentation? So when they, most of the cases, they were not maybe knowing what they were doing, they should have probably had to break down very well, using maybe this theory approach, the different problems that they were needed to solve. For example, to make a siphon work in this for the functions that they wanted to have them work as a cooking method. But it doesn't come as a straightforward, easy to experiment situation. More interesting, maybe even for the discussion that we are having. So would they have been able then, using an LLM maybe, to sharpen and improve their business model? This restaurant was not profitable. During the whole time they were running it, they had to make money with other things like selling books, going on TV, doing some documentaries, but the restaurant by itself was not a viable economically business model for them. Finally, also, would we have had an entrepreneur like this in a context where everyone is expecting to check, validate their ideas, and then this idea of this concept of somewhat that can reshape the whole context or environment where they operate to create a new type of cooking movement, like this molecular gastronomy, whether you like it or not, that's another story, or this new cuisine movement that they actually were able to trigger. They basically changed the environment together with other colleagues in France, in the UK, and other places. They actually coordinated this to change the narrative and the discourse in their environment. And this is something where, as I was mentioning before, only in situations where the AI can also start to reshape the environment could we see, maybe could we imagine that this would be happening. But otherwise, it seems that those elements might still hold. It's a bit closer to the story of the Wright brothers. No? So, in any case, there are many moving elements, and I wanted to close it up with those, leaving some questions also for further thoughts and discussion. Many thanks. This is what I wanted to share on experimentation in entrepreneurship, or the concept that we also like to call entrepreneurial experimentation. Thank you.